We do what the Title II tells us to do, which is the election law. We go to nursing homes starting 29 days before the election because the law tells us to do that. We only have those powers that are granted to us by the law. The Congress has the elastic clause where it says they can do whatever they need to do to help the country run better. We don't have that. There's no law that says the administrator can sit down and do what makes sense. I've got to do what the law says. And sometimes you run into situations where it's not clear where somebody lives, whether they're qualified or not. And actually, the way the process works, for example, we have given petitions in the past and put people on the ballot to run for Congress who don't live in the 2nd Congressional District. Okay, were they to win, I don't think they could hold the seat, yet they can still run. Because the law says that in order to serve, you have to do this. Now, if the law says in order to run, you have to do this, then we might have some jurisdiction. But when it says serves, we don't have any jurisdiction. So like the term limit, people say, well, why didn't you throw those term limited people off the ballot? Well, I never had the legal authority. What happens is they would have to run, win, and then whoever got beat would have to sue them. And it's kind of a messy situation, but it's the rule of law. You don't want to live in a country where one person, even if it's someone like me, gets to decide who goes on the ballot and who doesn't.
Recently, we had a case not in the 2nd Congressional District, but the 2nd County Commission District, where there was a candidate who was running as an independent, had a home in Farragut, and was claiming as a resident some nephew's house that he admitted to a neighborhood group he didn't really live in. And you couldn't kick him off the ballot.
We couldn't kick him off the ballot. We didn't have the legal authority. He could run, and there's also, of course, that clause in the charter for the redistricting. There's, I guess, what you might call a loophole. Any year that there's a redistricting, anybody in the county can run for any of the commission seats. Now, when they wrote that, I think what they meant to do was say that if you got redistricted out of one district, you could still run in the other. But that's not what they wrote. Yeah. They wrote that anybody could, and I guess you'd call that a loophole.
Yeah, well, if I were still there, I'd be writing a law that says what was meant by this is if your house is in one place and suddenly it's in a new district,
then
you can run either in the old one or the new one, but you can't run across town.
And I think that's the way the city does it. I think that there's clauses in place, but I think that perhaps they got a little sloppy when they wrote that, and didn't. I don't think they intended for people in Farragut to be able to run in the 8th district.
Yeah. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. But frequently I end interviews this way. It might be a habit you want to pick up. What haven't I asked that I should have asked about elections?
Well, you haven't asked what's on the ballot in November.
Yeah. Well, let's go through that.
There's a governor's race for everybody in Knox County, everybody across the state. There is a congressional race on every ballot. All of Knox County is in the 2nd Congressional District. Many of us have a Senate district. They're staggered. And there are two, the 5th and the 7th are up, and the 6th is not. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And everybody has a state House of Representative race. Everybody in Tennessee is voting on a constitutional amendment that guarantees the right to hunt, I believe. Is it hunt or hunt and fish? It's one of the two. I don't know. We'll be publishing it soon. If you're in the city of Knoxville, there is a question about streamlining the recall provision, a charter amendment. And if you're in the town of Farragut, there's a question of term limits. And there's your ballot.
Okay. Just from your personal perspective, you must get together with other election commissioners and share notes and go to conferences and learn from experiences like your overseas trips,
sure,
etc. Have you become a popular figure because you endured the term limits crisis and can speak to what term limits and trying to avoid them does in a community?
There's a website called electionline.org, which is an aggregate of election articles from all over the country. And I've been in that. I mean, I don't know if I'm popular, but I've certainly become well known. I was in that, last year about every day. When I went overseas, I met a guy in the airport in Kiev, and he came walking up to me. It was Eric Fay from St. Louis, and he looked at me and said, "Are you Greg Mackay?" And I said, "Yes, I am. Why? Do I owe you money?" He said, "No, I've read about you on election," and he introduced me. So, yeah, there are like 20,000 people in America that work in elections. We kind of know it. Some of us know each other. Okay. It's kind of fun.
Any other questions that you have for our guests before we turn off the camera and that's it?
How do you spell his name?
Ah, good question.
Yes.
It's capital Mackay. Only the M is capitalized.
So
it's Greg.
Yeah.
2 G's, one in the front, one in the back.
Okay. Very good, because reporters have to get names right.
Excellent question.
Yes.
Administrator of Elections is my title.
Knox County Administrator of Elections.
There we-
I was reading an article about, where is he? Sorry.
It's okay.
Ray Jenkins, who, in that whole issue of you not being a Democrat and the majority of the Knox County being Republicans, and he wanted to push mainly for Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Can you touch on that?
I can. There was an effort last time. The commissioners are made up of 3 of one party and 2 of the other, 3 of the majority party. And when the majority changed down in Nashville last year, in the '08 actually, then there was a move afoot all across the state to replace Democrat election administrators with Republicans. There were some people here that wanted to do that. There were quite a few that didn't. There was an editorial in the paper saying that they should keep me, because the first thing I did when I got in there, I was the vice chairman of the party in the 17th Ward. Bob Becker was the chairman. The very first thing I did was quit as vice chairman, because it's just not appropriate anymore. I mean, there's different roles that you go through in your life, and when you're the administrator of elections, you're not in a party anymore. I've never tried to help one party over the other. Some of my Democratic friends have gotten mad about that, but I just never have done that. And, well, I take that back. I decided early I can help everybody or I can help nobody, and I picked everybody. So I even help, I mean, you know, even, well, I'm not calling any names, but whoever walks in the door, we're gonna help them. So that's, I think, why it didn't work, because I have been nonpartisan in my job.
And I know he said that he didn't have anything against you, it just was that you were a Democrat, not a Republican. How hard is it when you get backfire or, like, have people say negative things about you?
Well, it bothered my mother and my wife, I think. They didn't like it, but I don't know. I mean, his wife is one of our officers, and we get along great. I mean, it's just political stuff. You've been through it. It's just politics. You know, it's like business or being a lawyer. You sit and yell at each other, and then, you know, you go have a beer afterwards. I mean, it's not a personal thing with him.
But the student
Or with me.
raises a good question, though.
Yeah.
Are you unique, or were there other Democrats who survived the switchover where Republicans generally at the state and sometimes local level were demanding, we want Republican administrators of elections?
Yeah, no, there were quite a few. In fact, the big cities especially. Ray Barrett in Nashville stayed. There's a guy in Chattanooga stayed, who's Bud Knowles, who's passed away since then. Todd Baxter in Murray County stayed, and there were others. There were quite a few. I think there were 20 of them out of 95.
So there's a lesson to be learned there. If you do your job really well and nonpartisanly, you can survive even this.
There you go. That's right. I don't think most people are that interested in partisan politics. There are partisans who are, but I think the vast majority of the people just don't care about party. They want government that does things effectively. So,
Back in your very early career, when you were partisan, you ran for the 2nd County Commission.
I did.
Yes.
I did. I was
You were the Democratic
unsuccessful.
nominee?
Mr. Harmon was successful when he ran.
Yeah.
I won one election, the primary, but I was
Yeah.
unopposed.
You lost to a guy named David
Dave
Collins,
yeah.
who was the guy I beat.
And ended up beating. That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yay!
right.
We have something in common. We ran the 2nd
So I
district.
ran in the 2nd district, same seat. But yeah, I was very partisan before I got the job. You know, I was a Democrat all the way. So,
Yeah.
and I still in my heart I'm a Democrat, but I try to do my job as if you couldn't tell which party I'm in. So,
Okay.
there we go.
I think we have all we need. You have any other questions? Anyone have any more questions? Oh, now the questions come.
I had just
Now
two
we-
really quick questions. Towards the beginning, you said for like absentee voters, for the mail-ins, you check their signature.
Mm-hmm.
How exactly do you go about doing that? Because I know my signature changes daily, and
Well, it
what
does.
other, like security risks are involved.
Right, and we're not handwriting experts by any means, but we have your voter registration on file. We have mine from when I registered, when I turned 18 back in a long time ago. And you'd be surprised. There are tells that don't change. So you could sign your name, and I could take you down the courthouse, and I could show you. Maybe it's the way you write your G, or, you know, maybe it's the lift off the line. There are certain things that don't change, and you can look at a signature, and you can tell whether it's that person's or not, even if it's 20 years old, 30 years old.
And then
40 years
also,
old.
you said that in Farragut, your first year, there was an 8-vote difference. What does constitute a tie then? If not 8 votes, does it have to be exact? Or?
It would have to be exact, yeah. And there is legislation in place And I touched on this earlier. I mean, I don't decide this stuff. When a controversy comes up, we go to the law book, we call Nashville, and there is something in place about what to do about a tie. So we've never had to deal with that, luckily, so.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, what are your plans after you finish this job title? Do you have any plans after that?
I'm gonna retire.
Okay.
Actually, what I plan on doing is, I've been on 3 overseas trips with, the OSCE, and they have short-term observers that come in for 10 days and then leave, and they have long-term observers that go there for 2 months, and they set up all the logistics and everything. So I'd like to do that maybe once a year or so. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it all the time, but I wouldn't mind, going. So actually, I'm learning Russian as we speak, so I know a little bit, about enough to get a haircut, so.
So any famous people on your election observing thing? Ever go with Jimmy Carter or anybody who we would know?
I haven't hooked up with Jimmy. Jimmy does a lot of Palestine, and I try to avoid places where they're shooting each other. That's my one rule, is wherever there's bullets flying, you won't see me there. So I've got a 12-year-old daughter now. Anyway, I did meet a fella who was a retired cop from, Coles to Newcastle. And he retired as the chief of police. And back in 1961 or 2 or 3, he was a beat cop. He had just started when the Beatles came to town. And they were trying to figure out what to do because they had all these screaming fans. So they put him into jail to keep him away from the fans while they're waiting for the show to start. So he had to go serve them tea. He served them tea, the Beatles tea, while they were sitting in jail. And he said Ringo was very nice, very polite. Then they put him in a paddy wagon and drove him over to the concert. So he wasn't famous, but he met somebody famous.
Any other questions for our guest? Yeah.
I read that the 2009 election cost $248,000, and it was paraphrased that you said that like to save every dime, that there should be some changes made in the election cycle. I was wondering if you could, tell me a little bit about what other ideas you would have as far as changes.
Sure. The 248, that's 2 city elections. They're about 125,000 apiece. And the last 3 elections we've done under budget. It's one thing to know how to run elections, but then the next step is to learn how to do them under budget. There are savings that we could make, and the biggest thing would be, closing these election day precincts and having voting centers. It would save at least $50,000 per election. And more importantly, it would be easier for the voter, less confusing. So, but there are things that we can do. We have cut back considerably just because of the economic times. Used to, you go into a polling place and there'd be 6 or 7 people there, and we've cut that back to 4 or 5 as much as we can. We don't want to have long lines, but on the other hand, in this budget, in today's economy, you've got to be very conscious of that. So we're doing what we can to save money.
All right, one more question.
Sorry. Can you just tell any disadvantages of doing the voting by mail that you can think of?
Well, there are disadvantages. One of them is you never know who's watching while they're filling out the ballot. There could be coercion.
Do you think that that idea would be well praised or well accepted?
Oh, I'm sure that there'd be tremendous controversy. They'd probably try to fire me and all that stuff if I did that. In Oregon, they do all their elections by mail, and it saves 30% on their election costs. They don't have election workers. They have a tremendous system for sorting and processing all the mail, of course,